These are the stories that matter, and the stories that inform us and engage us and inspire us and motivate us. I came to Washington more than 35 years ago for my first job at the Voice of America, where we tried to tell stories like this and truth around the world. And it matters more in this age of media than ever before. It has more influence than it has. In 1941, prominent Americans from many different walks of life and from across the political spectrum came together to establish an organization with a clear and compelling mission: to advance freedom around the world, to fight tyranny, and to give hope and assistance to those who fight for just governments, the rule of law, fundamental rights, and human dignity. Now, that mission is still vital and urgent. The Chinese government is ruthlessly cracking down on dissent. Russia carries out and carries on its aggression in Ukraine and thereby threatens the foundations of peace in Europe. The brutality of both the self-proclaimed Islamic State and the regime of Bashar al-Assad continues to rip Syria apart and drive millions from their homes. And the determination of democratic countries to defend freedom has begun to waver. So Freedom House today, as it has for the past 75 years, stands up to the dictatorships of every stripe. It shines a spotlight on the cruelty they inflict on their citizens. It sounds the alarm on the threats they pose to freedom beyond their borders. And it recognizes, as you saw in this video, the truly remarkable people who do the work on the front lines every day. Freedom House draws its vitality from the courageous women and men it works with, these people around the world, who defy the forces of oppression and demand respect for basic rights and liberties. And we're privileged to have some of them here with us this evening. So this evening, we will honor journalists who have tenaciously defended their right to tell the truth, because a free press is the lifeblood of a democratic society. We will recognize the achievements of a political leader who has used his authority to help the most vulnerable and secure the release of prisoners of conscience. And we will honor two women who have challenged the most severe abuses imaginable and work to drive change in their societies. Before we get to the awards, however, and to the evening, it is my honor to introduce the chairman of the Freedom House Board of Trustees, the Honorable Kenneth I. Juster. Ken.
Thank you very much, Frank. On behalf of our trustees, as well as the management and staff of Freedom House, we welcome you to this evening's dinner celebrating our 75th anniversary. Think about that, 75 years. That's a pretty impressive achievement for any organization and for everyone affiliated with it. So we thank all of you for being part of this wonderful event. As we begin this celebration, it is important to remember the world of 1941, when Freedom House was founded. At that time, the United States was deeply isolationist. We believed that the problems in Europe, including the spread of Nazism and fascism, were for the Europeans to handle. However, a small group of men and women had a different perspective and felt strongly about it. They saw a threat to freedom anywhere as a threat to freedom everywhere. They believed that the people of Europe and people everywhere deserved to live not only in peace and with dignity, but in a world free of tyranny and despotism. So in October of 1941, a few months before the United States entered World War II, these men and women founded an organization that, in their words, would stand as a beacon lighting the struggle for a free world. This organization would be the symbolic antithesis of, and democracy's answer to, the Nazi Party headquarters in Munich, known as Hitler's Brown House. As such, this new organization was called Freedom House. 75 years later, we are extremely proud of Freedom House's many achievements. Throughout the decades, Freedom House has stayed true to the organization's original intent. We played a role in the creation of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We were the first NGO to observe an electoral process abroad. We were at the forefront in advocating for those suffering under the injustice and oppression of communism. And of course, we broke new ground by developing incisive research and producing a series of publications that analyze and measure freedom and democracy around the world. Our 75th anniversary is not just about looking back at the accomplishments of Freedom House. The work of Freedom House is as crucial today as it was in 1941 and as it has been over the past 75 years. As we all know, the world is facing enormous challenges, including the growth in the number and barbarity of radical extremists and a powerful pushback by many authoritarian regimes that silence independent journalists, close the space for civil society, demolish political opposition, and deny their citizens the most fundamental rights. Freedom House directly challenges those regimes. Our analysis exposes their corruption and repression. Our advocacy work calls attention to the plight of those struggling for freedom. And our programmatic work provides crucial assistance to those activists who are bravely striving to achieve political reform. In its early years, Freedom House was based in New York and was composed of an active board of trustees and an executive director with a staff of 8 people. Today, in addition to the board of trustees and the president, we have some 170 men and women based in Washington, D.C., in New York, and in 16 countries around the world. They continue the critical work set out for them by Freedom House's founders, and I truly thank all of them for what they do for this organization. I am now pleased to introduce and to thank as well the chair of this evening's gala, whose outstanding leadership and hard work have made this event possible, Olin Wethington.
Thanks very much, Ken. And thanks to all of you for being part of this evening's gala dinner. For 75 years, Freedom House has worked to advance fundamental human rights and democratic values. This mission will not end very soon. Today, the challenge to freedom by authoritarian regimes is more profound and threatening than any time since the end of the Cold War. And here at home, sounds of isolation grow louder. Thus, the need for Freedom House's voice and leadership is compelling now. We are here tonight because we believe that freedom is indeed the future, but it must be worked for. It involves sacrifice, it involves resistance, and as our friends from Argentina reminded us last night, freedom is not for free. And I can suggest that some of our generous donors here tonight might agree with that statement. So, I would like to thank all who have supported Freedom House through this 75th anniversary gala. Your generosity is essential. And I would first like to thank our gala's lead sponsors, Eileen and John Donahoe, and our major supporters, Kim and Judy Davis, and Google. Please join me in a round of applause for them. Thank you. And thank you also to BAE Systems, Facebook, Ken Juster and Warburg Pincus, Ford Motor Company, and the Motion Picture Association of America for your support. And to Jeff Herbst and the museum for hosting us this wonderful evening and working with us to advance media freedom. And we are grateful to all who sponsored a table or purchased a seat this evening. Too many to name. I believe we had over 40 individuals supporting this event and over 24 corporate sponsors. Thank you very, very much. Give them a round of applause. I also want to recognize the vital role played by the entire Board of Trustees in this evening's event. They give generously to Freedom House and in so many important ways. I would ask them to stand and be recognized. Our thanks to all of you. Where are you? It's such a pleasure to be a member of this board. The collective commitment is so strong, and the effort that each and every one makes on behalf of the organization is so very impressive. And now I would like to acknowledge and welcome some special guests with us tonight. Congressman Brendan Boyle of Pennsylvania. I'm not forgetting the dear senator here. You'll have a moment shortly. Assistant Secretary of State Tom Malinowski, Deputy Assistant Secretary of State Dan Rosenblum, Assistant Secretary of Commerce Larry Strickling, USAID Assistant Administrator Paige Alexander, and USAID Assistant Administrator Tom Melia. We are also honored to have here tonight a number of ambassadors, the Ambassador of Argentina, the Czech Republic, Finland, Lithuania, Mali, and Cabo Verde. And finally, we welcome the 2013 Freedom Award winner, Chen Guangcheng of China. Where are you? In the back. Thank you for being here. A man of great courage. I am now pleased to introduce a champion of advancing democracy and human rights, who has brought vision, innovation, and energy, and a hands-on leadership to our organization, the President of Freedom House, Mark Lagon.
Let me begin by thanking again our Board of Trustees, and particularly Ken Juster as chair of the board and Olin Wethington as our dinner chair. The board has offered energetic stewardship of our institution and have been enormously helpful as partners, advisors, those giving guidance. I am thrilled to announce that we have just today exceeded the $1 million mark raised for this anniversary event. That's more than has been raised at any of our previous dinners, and that has in large part been made possible by Olin Wethington, given his uniquely canny, relentless, and gracious style of leadership as our dinner chair. But thank you to all of you for your generosity. Thank you. Enormous thanks goes to our staff as well. Many have made tonight possible. Daniel Callengart, Maggie Marshall, Shannon Donahoe, chief among them, but none more than Mary Maris. Thank you. Perhaps a trifle too often, it's been said that the arc of history is long but bends towards justice. But it requires people to be arc benders, taking action. Innovative Freedom House professionals from Washington to New York, from Mexico to Mali to Myanmar, from Kyiv to Kampala to Kyrgyzstan assist the world's arc benders to change their own countries. Indeed, the women and men of Freedom House are themselves arc benders. When formed in 1941 to shake Americans out of their isolationism, to take on the Nazis, as the likes of Charles Lindbergh back then called for America first, Freedom House was a bold bipartisan voice for moral clarity and leadership. When Stalin lowered the Iron Curtain and we honored with Freedom Awards architects of Western institutions like George Marshall, Arthur Vandenberg, Dean Acheson, Harry Truman, and Jean Monnet, Freedom House was a bold bipartisan voice for moral clarity and leadership. When McCarthyism reared its ugly head, Freedom House was a bold bipartisan voice for moral clarity and leadership. Through the Civil Rights Movement, and with Martin Luther King calling for civil rights legislation at our annual dinner 4 days after John F. Kennedy was assassinated, Freedom House was a bold bipartisan voice for moral clarity and leadership. During détente's drift, when the White House managed to snub Alexander Solzhenitsyn, Freedom House was a bold bipartisan voice for moral clarity and leadership. When there was an opportunity to propel Warsaw Pact nations towards democracy by welcoming them into NATO and into the European Union, Freedom House was a bold bipartisan voice for moral clarity and leadership. When some say that fighting terrorism requires turning a blind eye to Egypt's or Saudi Arabia's ghastly human rights abuses, Freedom House has been a bold bipartisan voice for moral clarity and leadership. When illiberal voices kindle corrosive nationalism, such as invoking the 4 M's of migrants, Muslims, Mexicans, and misogyny, Freedom House should be a bold bipartisan voice for moral clarity and leadership. When China offers a model of growth with corruption and without dissent that needs answering, Freedom House is a bold bipartisan voice for moral clarity and leadership. And when some think that democracies cannot afford the true bargain of supporting peaceful democratic change abroad, Freedom House is a bold bipartisan voice for moral clarity and leadership. In short, our authoritative assessments, forthright advocacy, and crucial assistance to activists show why we shouldn't merely celebrate Freedom House's estimable past. Freedom House is deeply needed now and into the future because history does not bend by itself if we idly stand by while others struggle for justice and democracy. And now, it is my honor to present the Leadership Award to Senator Richard Durbin, Assistant Democratic Leader. Freedom House's Leadership Award recognizes an elected official who's used their power and influence to speak on behalf of those whose voices are suppressed and rights are debased. A leader who insists that regimes guilty of gross human rights violations must be held to account and that human rights remain central to U.S. foreign policy. This is an apt description of tonight's honoree. Senator Durbin's record demonstrates his consistent commitment to those who are denied their basic freedoms. He has repeatedly reminded us that we must stay true to our democratic values here at home, as he's raised awareness of violence against women, racial profiling, criminal justice reform, the underreporting of hate crimes, the use of solitary confinement, and voting requirements that affect low-income and minority citizens. In the international focus of his, he's sponsored the Genocide Accountability Act and the Child Soldiers Prevention Act. In 2015, and something that Freedom House is very focused on, he was among those who reintroduced the Global Magnitsky Human Rights Accountability Act. But perhaps he is best known for his passionate work to secure the release of political prisoners all over the world, including in Belarus, Cameroon, the Gambia, Vietnam, Uzbekistan, Iran, and Turkmenistan. Please take a look at this tribute.
For some time, I've come to the floor to speak about an issue that doesn't receive a lot of attention, and it's the issue of political prisoners in foreign lands.
I don't know of anyone who's more passionate in our caucus or on the floor of the United States Senate in bringing up individual cases of people who have been subject to abuses by their government, where they have no one else who will notice them, but Senator Durbin will.
This picture here, this photograph, shows Mr. Sanikoff in the defendant's cage during his trial in the Belarusian capital of Minsk. They put him in a cage. His crime, this man ran for president of his country.
It has an incredible impact when a member of the United States Senate takes the time to speak on the floor of the United States Senate and shows a picture of someone who is being persecuted halfway around the world.
They are trying to find one thing that we Americans take for granted every day: freedom. The freedom to practice the religion of their choice, the freedom to write a newspaper or do a blog, the freedom to vote for the candidate of their choice, their freedom to oppose government policy. And as a result of that, they have been arrested and imprisoned.
Human rights activist Alice Balyatsky spent nearly 3 years in harsh prison conditions, including solitary confinement. In 2011, Senator Durbin visited Belarus.
И эти встречи, которые он провел с белорусскими чиновниками, были ясным сигналом для белорусских чиновников о том, что так недопустимо, так неприемлемо. Репрессии нужно остановить.
Mr. President, I'm calling on the government of Belarus to immediately and unconditionally release these political prisoners.
When you see the face, and that's what Senator Durbin has done, as a result, these people have been released. They now have freedom. There's no greater gift he could give someone than standing up for a courageous individual and allowing that person to get back their freedom.
I and my colleagues here in the Senate will continue to do our best to draw attention to their plight, work for their release, and stand up for the cause of human rights in the United States and around the world.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's my privilege to introduce the recipient of this year's Leadership Award, the senior U.S. Senator from Illinois and the Assistant Minority Leader, Richard J. Durbin.
I want to thank President Mark Lagone, Ken Jester, Olin Wethington for picking me or being part of the group that chose me to receive this Freedom House Leadership Award. But I want to recognize the true heroes tonight before we go any further. The activists, the journalists, elected officials, and many working around the world to challenge and reform autocratic regimes. The dedicated staff of Freedom House, who are on the front line every day for 75 years, helping around the world to promote basic freedoms. Congratulations to the 2016 Freedom Award recipients: Hala Al-Dosari, Vianda Keel, Hector Horacio Magneto. When I read their backgrounds, it reminded me of those tests you take for college, and they give you 4 things and say, which one does not belong? I looked at these other 3 and thought, I'm just an elected official in America, lucky to enjoy freedom. These people have risked their lives for freedom, and I'm glad that you are honoring them this evening. Freedom House has had such an important role in defining America and its values. I'm honored that you worked after World War II and during World War II for the cause of freedom and for the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. That work led to a new era in the history of human rights and provided a template for political rights and civil liberties around the world. Sadly, there are too many countries today where freedom and democratic values are in retreat, often under the guise of fighting terrorism, promoting nationalism, or enforcing dubious blasphemy laws. Whether it's Russia, Venezuela, North Korea, Gambia, or so many others, the game is almost always the same. Use false patriotism and blame to mask domestic shortcomings and political abuse, and brand those who push for a more open or democratic society as traitors, terrorists, or blasphemers. And of course, silence those voices with incarceration and intimidation, like the election monitoring group Golos, or rare remaining independent newspaper RBC in Russia, and journalists Khadija, I'm going to mess this up, I'm sorry, Khadija Ismailov in Azerbaijan. She is celebrating her 40th birthday this week behind bars for simply speaking out against corruption. I want to lend my voice to help the Department of State, well represented tonight. I want to acknowledge two of my former Georgetown classmates, Phil and Milan Verveer. And Milan, of course, had a special assignment for global women's rights, and under Secretary of State Clinton, honored to be with both of you this evening. I thank all of you from the State Department. Special thanks to UN Ambassador Samantha Power. Reading her book is a life-changing experience. Groups like Freedom House, Freedom Now, and so many other human rights groups, and your important work. We've made important gains. You saw the little reference to my speech on the floor about Alexander Lukashenko, who I had the dubious honor of meeting. After a sham election in his country, he decided the best thing to bring people together was to imprison everyone who ran against him, which he did in the next 48 hours. Mr. Sannikov, who was on this presentation, spent 5 years in prison because he had the nerve to run against Lukashenko. I went over there, met with their families, tried to make as much democratic noise as possible, and eventually they were all released. I established in 2007 my dream subcommittee. I couldn't have picked a better subcommittee. I got to make it. And it consisted of the Senate Judiciary Committee subcommittee on, catch this agenda, the Constitution, human rights, and civil rights. Man, what an opportunity. The jurisdiction of that subcommittee reached in every direction. I had two of the most exceptional people working for me. One, whose name may be familiar because of his family, Joe Zogby, who was my right-hand man when it came to this subcommittee on human rights. And when it came to foreign affairs, he's here tonight. I want to give a special shout out to my staffer who has worked so effectively and so hard in securing the release of so many prisoners, Chris Holman. Thank you, Chris, for all that you've done. There are so many people enjoying freedom today because of you. I sat down at that subcommittee meeting, and my ranking Republican was Tom Coburn, conservative from Oklahoma. By the end of the day, I had even convinced him to join me and co-sponsor some of these measures. The beginning of each subcommittee started out the same because they were all compelling human issues. I said, this committee is not about lamentation, it's about legislation. We need to do something, not just wring our hands and cry over the state of affairs in the world. So we passed the Genocide Accountability Act, the Child Soldiers Accountability Act, all signed into law, Trafficking Accountability Act, Human Rights Enforcement Act, bipartisan measures signed by presidents of both parties. And through the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, my great friend Ben Cardin and I worked on passing the Child Soldiers Prevention Law. But we didn't stop with the idea that human rights began at the water's edge. We focused on human rights and civil rights right here at home in the United States. Thanks to an inspiring article by a Dr. Atul Gawande. I sure hope you know who he is. He is an amazing man. He wrote this article on solitary confinement, and it really impressed me. And I said, we need a hearing on the subject about solitary confinement in the United States. We had the first ever hearing on solitary confinement and the second. The net result, the solitary confinement prison population in our federal prisons since the first hearing has gone down 30%. We are making changes and reforms as we should. We had the very first hearing on discrimination against Muslim Americans. We also passed the Fair Sentencing Act, which changed sentencing guidelines, the disparity in crack and powder cocaine. The net result of that, the release of these prisoners who were in for interminable periods of time, was to save our federal prison system, listen to this, 30,000 prison years. 30,000 prison years. That's where the sentences were reduced in a bill which I co-sponsored with Senator Sessions of Alabama, go figure, and was signed, of course, by President Obama. Let me say a word, if I can, about some of the people that we have tried to help around the world. I could go into specifics, and I know I'm the last thing between you and dinner, but let me just say a couple stories that I remember. Lapiro Debanya, known as the Guitar Man in Cameroon, jailed for 3 years in a notorious prison called Hell on Earth for being a musical critic of the Biya dictatorship. We helped to find his release in 2011. He spoke at the 2013 Oslo Freedom Forum event, thanking all of those around the world who fought for his release. Ibrima Mame, journalist in Gambia, missing since 2007 when he was grabbed by strongman Yahya Jammeh's security force and never heard from again. We still keep pressing to find out what happened. Duque, he visited me in my office, jailed for 6 years in Vietnam for writing against the government. I met with him after his release. Despite all that he endured, all he wanted was to continue to write and advocate for human rights. This was a special one. Layla and Arif Yunus, human rights advocates in Azerbaijan, married couple, suffered significant health issues in prison on trumped-up charges. When I met their only daughter, Dinara, I said, let me see what I can do to help. Well, let me tell you, watching the video of Dinara greet her parents at the airport in Netherlands and seeing the toll that jail had taken on them was incredibly touching. And Raif Badawi, a writer who was sentenced to 10 years and 1,000 lashes in 2012 for suggesting a peaceful discussion of religion. Raif's lawyer, Walid Abu Aker, was also arrested and sentenced. They are still awaiting justice. These are causes and issues which we must continue. Let me conclude by saying I've heard time and again what it means for someone in prison to hear that they are not forgotten. Freedom House reminds us of that every day, and your participation in this program does as well. They know somewhere in the world there's a Freedom House, or a politician, or an activist fighting for their release. Everyone in this room has a voice. Please never underestimate the power of your voice to cast light on atrocities aimed at silencing those fighting for basic human rights. Thanks for all you do and for this magnificent award. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Senator, for your remarks and for your great leadership on human rights. We're honored by your presence. Very fine. As we gather tonight, we wish also to remember the courageous human rights defenders who struggle at the front lines for freedom. I would direct your attention to the screen. These men and women, courageous men and women, languish in prisons, and they have sacrificed their livelihoods, their safety, their health and well-being in their fight to bring justice to their countries. We remember them tonight. There are thousands of others like them. Let me read their names. Leopoldo Lopez of Venezuela, Liu Xiaobo of China, Abdulhadi Al-Khawaja of Bahrain, Zainab Al-Khawaja of Bahrain, Raif Badawi of Saudi Arabia, Gao Zhisheng of China, Khadija Ismailova of Azerbaijan, Bekele Gerba of Ethiopia, Boiti Minhang of Vietnam, Bahare Hidayat of Iran, Antonio Ledesma of Venezuela, and Ildar Dadin of Russia. A moment of silence, please, for these courageous persons. Thank you. At your place, you'll find a glass of wine. You're probably saying it's about time. I am. The glass has the 75th anniversary logo of Freedom House etched on it. This is your glass to keep. But I would ask that you raise the glass with me in a toast to Freedom House in recognition of the timeless mission launched by its founders in 1941, and for the 75 years of dedication and commitment to the advancement of human rights and democracy. May Freedom House remain at the forefront of the struggle for freedom. To Freedom House. I thank you. Please enjoy your dinner. And when we return, we will honor the rest of this evening's awardees. Thank you.
Good evening. Boy, I know we're enjoying this dinner. Thank you. Good evening. I'm Paula Dobriansky, and I proudly serve on the Freedom House Board and Executive Committee. and I hope that you've enjoyed this dinner, and I know by trying to get your attention that you certainly have. I have the honor now of presenting the Freedom of Expression Award. Scottish jurist Thomas Erskine once said, quote, "The press must be free. It has always been so, and much evil has been corrected by it. If government finds itself annoyed by it, let it examine its own conduct, and it will find the cause," unquote. Well, Hector Magneto, CEO of Grupo Clarín, knows a thing or two about annoying a government and exposing its conduct. Grupo Clarín is Argentina's largest and most influential media company, and Mr. Magneto is its tenacious leader. Facing enormous pressure by both the Nestor and Cristina Kirchner governments after publishing articles critical of their actions, Mr. Magneto refused to back down, knowing that democracy cannot not survive without freedom of expression and an unfettered press. Alberto Ganza Paz, a prominent Argentinian newspaper editor who received the Freedom Award more than 50 years ago, pointed out that, quote, "It is much easier to fight to keep the freedoms you have than to fight to regain the freedoms you have lost," unquote. Mr. Magneto is a perfect example of how to lead that fight, as this video attests. Please watch.
Hector Magneto is widely recognized throughout Latin America for his courageous leadership in defense of a free press in Argentina.
Héctor Magneto, al frente del Grupo Clarín, soportó durante esta década uno de los embates más fuertes en contra de la libertad de prensa.
In 2008, the Argentinian government launched an unprecedented campaign to discredit Grupo Clarín, the largest media organization in Argentina. Hector Magneto's response was unequivocal: to maintain the independence of Clarín and preserve its journalistic integrity.
Clarín had a position to defend, and the position was on the merits of human rights, individual freedoms, and democratic institutions.
The government initiated more than 1,200 hostile actions against Grupo Clarín, including seizures by security forces, public defamation, false criminal complaints, circulation blocks, and advertising boycotts.
For 7 consecutive years, a systematic onslaught against Clarin's content, against Clarin's people. Héctor Magneto, first and foremost.
Magneto resistió, mantuvo la empresa en su misma conducción, ejerciendo su misma libertad de opinión, pese incluso a que tuvo que atravesar una terrible situación de salud. No bajó los brazos, siguió adelante.
Magneto's unswerving commitment to a free and independent press continues to serve as a role model for other countries in Latin America threatened with similar challenges.
Héctor Magneto es una figura irreemplazable en el mundo periodístico latinoamericano. Merece todos los reconocimientos de quienes creemos en la libertad y en el periodismo.
The legacy is absolutely gigantic.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am honored to welcome to the stage Mr. Hector Magneto, CEO of Grupo Clarín. Felicitaciones. Gracias.
Hay muchas formas de agradecer este reconocimiento, tener en no cese y te puedo compartir con quienes trabajo todos los días.
I would like to thank you, and it's a great pride in order to that I want to share this award with all my team and with everybody that works with me.
Profesor de una forma de aceptarlo, entendiendo que es un reconocimiento a la libertad de expresión, que no es una libertad más, es el sustento de las sociedades democráticas.
And there's only way to accept this award, understanding the acknowledgement of freedom of expression. That is not just one more freedom, it is the pillar of all democratic societies.
La libertad de expresión es un derecho básico y un freno a los totalitarismos.
Freedom of expression is a fundamental pillar right, and is a way to stop totalitarianism.
Es una libertad primordial que nos permite cuestionar, disentir y cambiar. Por eso es la base de sociedades más abiertas y transparentes y la raíz de muchas otras libertades.
And it's one of the basic freedoms, one that allows us to question, dissent, and make transformations. And that is why it is the pillar of societies that are more open and more transparent now, and is the root and the pillar and the building blocks of all societies.
Sabemos además que es un valor que se construye día a día. Tenemos libertad de expresión cuando ejercemos la libertad de expresión.
We know that it's a value that is built day by day. We have freedom of expression when we do build that freedom of expression and we exercise it.
A través de esta libertad, que también se materializa en los medios de comunicación, la gente hace oír sus ideales, sus pesas y sus frustraciones. Y el periodismo profesional es una herramienta para ayudar a expresarlos.
Through this freedom, we know that it is created, this freedom is created through media or communication media, and people right now can hear ideas, ideologies, complaints, frustrations, and professional journalism is right now a tool to express this.
Nuestra pasión por el periodismo está potenciada hoy por la revolución digital y las redes sociales.
Our passion for journalism right now is driven by digital revolution and the social media.
La tecnología está cambiando el modo de circulación de algo que es muy valioso para las personas. El conocimiento.
Technology right now is driving a new change that is very valuable for people, knowledge.
Los medios tenemos más herramientas que nunca para investigar, aunque también tenemos nuevos desafíos que provocan incertidumbre y reaccionamientos.
The media companies right now have more tools in order to do research, to investigate, and also we have new challenges ahead that result into uncertainties and restructures.
La revolución tecnológica nos obliga a estar más activos, más cerca de la gente y aún más comprometidos con la libertad de expresión.
This technology revolution right now demands us to be more active, closer to the people, and more committed to the freedom of expression.
En la última década, la Argentina vivió un proceso político que buscó perseguir la disidencia para concentrar el poder.
Argentina in the last decade had undergone a country of dissent and concentration of power.
Ese proceso necesitaba silenciar las críticas y las denuncias.
It was a project that at that time needed to silence criticism and claims.
Y por eso trató a los medios como enemigos, buscó asociarlos y desacreditados.
And that's why it treated us, the media, as enemies. It seeks to asphyxiate them and to discredit them.
Los autoritarismos accionan de manera paradoxal. En el nombre de la libertad de expresión, atentan contra ella.
Authoritarianism basically act in a paradox. They act on behalf of freedom of expression, but they go against it.
Es un juego perverso que parecimos en el país y que sigue asolando a otras de América Latina.
It's a perverse game that we suffer in my country that is still hitting or attacking Latin America.
El antiterrorismo del poder solo podría ser desenmascarado por las herramientas genuinas del terrorismo.
This anti-journalism of the power can only be unmasked with the legitimate tools of journalism.
Por la búsqueda profesional de la verdad.
With a professional search and pursuit of truth.
Nosotros tratamos de responder con más periodismo.
We try to come up with more journalism.
Gran parte de la sociedad argentina se sintió representada por él.
And a large part of Argentina felt that it was represented by this journalism.
Le decimos que no a la sumisión que se nos trató de imponer e enfrentamos un durísimo acoso económico y judicial.
We said no against, or we didn't buckle under to what they tried to impose to us, and we faced a very hard economic and legal attack.
Pero el ejercicio de la libertad editorial fue más fuerte que cualquier ataque y cualquier aparato de propaganda.
But the freedom in a newsroom was stronger than any political system that intended this attack.
Como hombre de medios, tengo claro que todos los días tenemos que trabajar para hacer mejor las cosas.
As a man of the media, I know that we all need to work to improve these sort of things.
Y también que si queremos seguir siendo lo que somos, no debemos aceptar que se nos diga qué decir ni cómo pensar.
And if we want to continue being who we are, we shall not accept what we need to do or what we need to think of.
Ese es también, en definitiva, mi compromiso con la organización que represento, todo lo que decimos hacer y con la sociedad de la que somos parte.
This is eventually my commitment, the organization that I preside, and what we choose to do, and with the society that we're part of.
A esos y a ustedes, muchísimas gracias.
To all of you, thank you very much.
Hello, I'm Rebecca Hiley, a Freedom House trustee and a member of the executive committee. The next award recipient is a particularly meaningful one for Freedom House, as we share core values which each of us has promoted for the last 70 years. Freedom House is very proud this evening to bestow the 2006 Corporate Leadership Award on German publishing company Axel Springer. As Freedom House was advocating for a new liberal world order at the end of World War II, Axel Springer was founded by a father and son who laid as the cornerstone of their company a philosophy centered around freedom. They codified their principles of upholding liberty and rejecting totalitarianism into a corporate constitution in 1967, the only independent media company to do so. To demonstrate their commitment to democratic ideals, they built their new headquarters in 1966 at the height of the Cold War in a conspicuous spot, right next to the demarcation line of the Berlin Wall. Today, Axel Springer is one of the largest and most prominent media companies in Europe, and its adherence to the principles of freedom remains central to the company and imbues all of its endeavors. Just this past month and last month, they have been in the news in Turkey, a country where the press has come under increasing restriction. For standing up to the Turkish president's attempts to silence his critics, the company's president published an open letter passionately defending freedom of speech, art, and satire. Please take a look at this tribute.
Axel Springer is a media company founded after the Second World War, traditionally a company of newspapers and magazines.
The publishing company was launched in 1946 by journalist Axel Springer, a fervent proponent of freedom and German unity.
Einigkeit und Recht und Freiheit.
In the mid-1960s, Axel Springer moved his company's headquarters from Hamburg to Berlin, choosing a location just a few blocks from Checkpoint Charlie.
The skyscraper that stands symbolically and boldly right up against the wall that separates East and West.
Axel Springer said, I want to build my publishing house at this particular spot in Berlin as a lighthouse of freedom.
A few years later, Axel Springer implemented a company-wide code of ethics, committing employees to promote freedom, support global Jewry, and fight political totalitarianism.
We also fight against all those extremists who, despite their democratic protestations, would destroy democracy.
Through their vast publications and steadfast corporate culture, Axel Springer sends the message that freedom is not something which is fought for and won, but has to be continually lived and defended. Today, Axel Springer has established itself as a major player in the rapidly changing media world.
We want to become the leading digital media company.
The company now has more than 15,000 employees and is active in 40 countries worldwide. What hasn't changed, however, is the company's 70-year commitment to the core values that Axel Springer put in place when he founded the publishing company that bears his name, strengthening freedom and democracy.
I am pleased to introduce Mr. Ralph Bushi, President of International Axel Springer, who will accept this year's 2016 Corporate Leadership Award.
Good. Come over here.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, the fact that the Axel Springer Media Group, on whose behalf I have the honor of speaking tonight, has been presented the Leadership Award in the very year in which Freedom House celebrates its 75th anniversary of its foundation. It's something we consider to be a very special honor. One of the last anniversaries that we in Berlin celebrated was the commemoration of the 100th birthday of our founder, Axel Springer, in 2012. We did this by ensuring that the whole year and all of our diverse activities were portrayed in a special way under his motto, Axel Springer's motto, the motto of freedom. The freedom of thought and action, the freedom of speech, and naturally the freedom of the media. How rare it is, unfortunately, for journalists to be able to inform themselves freely and then also to report freely on their research was once again painful to observe at the beginning of this month of May in Turkey, where two editors of the daily newspaper Cumhuriyet were sentenced to prison as the result of a private criminal charge filed by Turkish President Erdogan, simply because they had discovered that the Turkish Secret Service had been supplying weapons to jihadist groups in Syria and had then written about it. Similar examples for an increase in restrictions placed on the freedom of the media can also be unfortunately cited in a number of Eastern European countries, where we, Axel Springer, have an important number of media offerings together with our Swiss joint venture partner Ringier, and where the situation has become much more difficult in recent times under new nationalistic governments. It has even become untenable for us in Russia, where a new media law since 2015 limits the shares held by foreign media investors to a small and completely irrelevant stake of 20%. For us, as the publisher of the opinion-forming business magazine Forbes Russia, this was simply not acceptable. We have in the meantime, and after 10 years of engaged journalism, left Russia, whose further economic development and liberalization we had once so much believed in. This was all the more difficult for us, and especially for our Russian team, who has gone through many painful experiences, had lost a wonderful colleague in Paul Klebnikov there years before. Paul, the founding editor-in-chief of Forbes Russia, was the victim of a brutal assassination in 2004, just right in front of our publishing house in Moscow. He seems to have been too critical and, let's say, uncomfortable for certain circles in Russia. Uncomfortable probably also describes the professional work our two journalists, Jens Koch and Markus Hellwigs, two reporters from our weekly newspaper Bild am Sonntag, did, and they were held as hostages in Iran from October 2010 to February 2011, just to quote a few examples. But nevertheless, we at Axel Springer, we have never allowed ourselves to be intimidated by such attacks. On the contrary, in 1967 already, our founder formulated the so-called essentials, we heard that before, kind of a constitution for the company, to convey a concrete idea of his understanding of freedom to all journalists working for him, his company in Germany at this time. Now, at our last management summit a couple of weeks ago, which we held in Paris out of solidarity with the victims of the terrorist attacks on the satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo and on the Bataclan Concert Hall 2015, I think we all remember very well these terrible attacks. There we adapted these guiding principles in a way that they can now provide orientation for all of our employees in our meanwhile internationally active media company. And the 5 individual elements of these guidelines are as follows. We stand up for freedom, the rule of law, democracy, and the united Europe. We support the vital rights of the State of Israel to be naturally understood under the light of the very immediate history between Germany and the Jewish people. Thirdly, we demonstrate solidarity by sharing the liberal community of values with the United States of America, something that is from time to time surprising in Europe, believe it or not. The fourth individual element is that we reject all political and religious extremism. And number 5, we do uphold the principles of a free and socially fair market economy. And ultimately, we also see our common launch of Politico Europe. Thank you, John, to be such a good partner in Brussels a year ago as a hopefully major contribution to the permanent shaping of the political opinion in Europe. And Europe has grown into quite a big continent with many, many very different nations in it, and you know that very well. So, ladies and gentlemen, Freedom House has presented the Axel Springer Publishing Group its Corporate Leadership Award. We are profoundly grateful for this award. We accept it with humility. and we see it as an incentive, for we know that one is never completely assured of freedom, and we all have together to continually fight to preserve it. Thank you very much.
Freedom House began bestowing its Freedom Award in 1943 to men and women who have shaped and changed the world and immeasurably extended human rights and democracy. So tonight, we add 2 more names to the impressive list of Freedom Award winners. In August of 2014, hundreds of thousands of Yazidis were being trapped and executed by ISIS in the mountains of northern Iraq. What was happening there was a hellish nightmare. Yazidi men, young and old alike, were being rounded up and summarily executed. Small children were dying of thirst and starvation, and thousands of women and young girls were being taken captive by ISIS and then sent into slave markets, subjected to multiple rapes and torture, or forced into marriages. As this horror was occurring, Vian Dakil, the Iraqi parliament's only female Yazidi member, took to the floor in an emotional, unrehearsed speech to plead for the Yazidis to be saved. The speech was so powerful that it was viewed online hundreds of thousands of times. And it was so influential that the President of the United States cited it as influencing his decision to authorize airstrikes in the region. That is a voice. But Mrs. Dakil's pleas for assistance did not end with her appeals on the floor of the parliament that day. And since then, she has been on a tireless mission to abate the plight of the Yazidis, to free the women and girls mercilessly held captive by ISIS fighters, and to have what has happened to her people formally classified as genocide. Of course, she does all of this at great risk to herself and her family. I have received warnings from government intelligence that I am now ISIS's most wanted woman, she has said. If they capture me, they will execute me at once. Freedom House is very proud to award the 2016 Freedom Award to Vian Dakil of Iraq. Please. We're sorry that Vian could not be with us, but we certainly understand the difficult circumstances she's in. Her voice is so vitally important, what she says, where it lands, and how that story is told. So we thank her for sending her remarks. And now our final presentation of the evening, Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, as we know, is one of the most repressive regimes in the world. It's ranked among the worst of the worst by Freedom House's Freedom in the World report. It's a country where there is no religious freedom, no political freedom, no freedom of expression, no freedom of assembly, and where punishments for crimes include floggings, hand or foot amputations, or public executions. For a woman, it is a country where you are a second-class citizen, where you cannot go out in public without a male guardian, you cannot drive a car, you must dress in black from head to toe, where male permission is required for everything from whom you may marry to whether you can work. And if you are the victim of rape, you are the one who's punished. So imagine how brave it is for a woman to stand up and publicly declare that this must end, that women should have political, social, and economic rights, that they must be accorded opportunity and dignity, and that they must be able to feel safe from violence in their own homes. Our next awardee has been courageous enough to do all of this. And Freedom House is honored to recognize Hala Al-Dosari with its 2016 Freedom Award. Please watch this tribute.
Hi, my name is Hala Al-Dusri, and I'm here to give a statement on the situation of human rights defenders in Saudi Arabia. I just think of myself all the time as a concerned citizen, somebody who sees a problem and trying to do something about it.
10 years ago, Hala Al-Dusari began writing and speaking out about women's health and rights issues in Saudi Arabia.
She is among a small group of women that have begun to speak out. This is a unique individual of incredible courage.
One of the most important qualities that I see in human rights defenders, people that I respect, is that they try their best to take the right position. Is that they try to act on their beliefs, whether would that be something that would cost them or not.
She is one of the first people that had the courage to actually put her name on a report that she put to the UN.
I have submitted a report called Unfulfilled Promises that document the discrimination against women in Saudi Arabia.
Hala has joined other women to demand the right to drive a car.
In 2013, it was a big campaign. We decided to take pictures of ourselves driving. Some of us got arrested, some of us got detained, some of us got their cars confiscated by the government.
She believes so strongly in these issues that she's willing to take those risks.
I have been subjected to defamation campaigns. I have been subjected to threats, online smears campaigns. Basically, I'm now in a place where I feel like it's not safe for me to be inside Saudi Arabia.
She has been told that if she returns to the country, that she'll be interrogated and detained.
Hala continues to work from outside her country, reaching tens of thousands of Saudi women through her website and blog.
Hala's blog is very popular inside Saudi Arabia, and it is a source of information and ideas that women have never had access to.
I feel like this is what I was supposed to be. This is what I'm supposed to do.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's my distinct pleasure to present to you Dr. Hala Al-Dusari.
Thank you. I am deeply honored to receive such a prestigious distinction and to be among iconic freedom advocates. This event granted the women of Saudi Arabia much-needed visibility at times of serious challenges and transformations. The Freedom Award is a recognition of women's activism in Saudi Arabia, despite the severe political restrictions on their rights. Women in Saudi Arabia continue to struggle against an state-enforced guardianship system in laws and practices, one that requires women to obtain approval from their fathers, husbands, or even sons to access basic rights and resources. The guardianship system renders women, regardless of their age or capacity, dependent on their male relatives. Women would need approval for identification or travel documents, to enroll in education, to marry, to get to work, or to travel. The ability of women to challenge the existing laws and harmful social norms are minimal due to the prohibition on the freedom of assembly and expression. In addition, the number of legal restrictions enforced on women to access economic participation and opportunities in Saudi Arabia is very high, that Saudi Arabia is ranked the least among 173 countries in women participation. So without adequate income, freedom of mobility, or ability to make autonomous choices in their lives, women and their children become vulnerable for poverty, marginalization, and gender-based violence. Nevertheless, the amazing women and men of Saudi Arabia are working persistently to challenge and confront these issues. And it is in our shared journey that led me here tonight. My work and advocacy would have never been possible without the inspiration, the wisdom, the courage, and the perseverance and listening ears, bravery and love and creativity of these individuals. Those women who lobbied for the right to mobility, for public participation, for protection from violence, for equal citizenship rights and the removal of the guardianship system, and the men who re-examined the religious edicts to counter the discriminatory state version, who emailed us videos and writings of support, who helped us in locating resources and solutions for women at risk, who supported their fellow women to navigate the male-dominated institutions, and who stood in solidarity with us in our journey without thinking of the risks. I can never stand here without mentioning the resilience of my beloved Saudi women activists who persistently challenged the discriminatory norms and law despite being widely outnumbered and threatened, or the sacrifices of the members of the Association for Civil and Political Rights who are harshly punished and imprisoned for demanding legal and constitutional reforms, and who were the first to congratulate me for being nominated for this prestigious award. Your bravery will never be forgotten. I wouldn't also be here without being driven by my love and concern for the well-being of my sister's children and the children of my country, who drive my quest for a better world. You all give me the courage and purpose to continuously try to transform my country so that one day your bravery, integrity, full potentials, and equal worth will be celebrated. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think you'll agree that this has been an inspiring evening. This concludes the program. So please join me once more in congratulating this evening's awards recipients, Senator Richard Durbin, Hector Magneto, Axel Springer, Vianda Kuyl, and Hala Aldasari. We thank you for your principled stands, for your brave deeds, your sacrifices, your service of freedom, democracy, and fundamental rights for all, and your extraordinary achievements. On this 75th anniversary, we take a moment, too, to thank the founders of Freedom House for their bold stance at a time similar to today in so many ways of divisiveness and uncertainty. They envisioned an organization that would always stand as a beacon for freedom and as an enduring ally for those who labor for democratic ideals and the rights of others overseas and here at home. I should also thank Mark for his efforts in his early tenure and for the imagination and the energy that he has brought to Freedom House. So Mark, congratulations to you as well. Thank you for everything that you're doing. Thanks to all for joining us here this evening, for what you believe in and what you've contributed to. We're so grateful for your ongoing support and for the mission of Freedom House itself. Keep up the work. Keep up the good fight. Thank you, and good night.